Executive Chamber, number 3, in the name of the people. Composite, take 1.
Early in January, leaders of our state Senate and state Assembly receive hand-carried letters from the governor. The letters say, "I would appreciate the privilege of appearing before your honorable bodies in joint session on Wednesday, January 6th at 1 p.m., or as soon thereafter as may be convenient, to deliver personally my annual message to the legislature." Welcome. Up one flight of stairs from the executive chamber, which is the governor's office in our state capital, are two great rooms, the state Senate chamber and this chamber of the New York State Assembly. Visitors in Albany call this a beautiful room, impressed by the Gothic architecture, the great stone columns, the carved fireplaces, the soft carpeting underfoot. I admire the interior design also, but to me there has always been something else about this room that affects me deeply: the chairs. Not the rich green leather of the chairs, but the chairs themselves. The fact that they are here, as in 49 other states, set up for the elected representatives of the people to talk out their differences, to establish the common needs, and to fashion the laws that we live by. When empty, the beauty of this room is in the memory of many sincere men and some great men who have labored here in the democratic process. Theodore Roosevelt, who spoke softly and carried a big stick. Al Smith, the happy warrior, represented a New York City district for 12 years. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a state senator from Hyde Park before being elected governor and then president. Robert Wagner, the father of New York City's mayor, served in both the Assembly and the Senate. Irving Ives was assemblyman from Shenango County for 16 years before his election to the United States Senate. When our legislature is in session, the beauty of this room can be awesome, like the inside of a crucible, where under great pressure and amid high temperatures, raw materials are refined. Legislators can be angry men, not the anger of temper uncontrolled, but the anger of caring intensely about the needs of the people in whose name they have come to Albany. On the first Wednesday after the first Monday in January, the Senate and the Assembly gather in joint session. In this room, the governor, speaking in the name of all the people of New York, delivers his annual message. Into this legislative crucible, the governor places his summary of major problems facing our state and his proposals to solve those problems. The governor's function is to recommend, to propose, to persuade where he can, and then later to approve or disapprove legislative action. The process of making law to provide state services and of raising money to pay for those services remains where it should be, in the hands of our senators and our assemblymen.
We must move this bill now. If the bill doesn't come to a vote on the floor today, it's going to be dead for the rest of the session, and another $300 million is going to go down.
A proposed law in New York starts out as a bill that is introduced by senators or assemblymen, and then referred for study to one of the various committees that specialize in banking, health and welfare, agriculture, insurance, and so on.
It's been called to consider the legislation by Mr. McCloskey, introductory 4740, print 4926, to amend the real property law in relation to the sale of subdivided lands. As I understand it, this bill is designed to...
Assembly committees, Senate committees, or joint committees, as the case may be, hear testimony for and against a bill.
Became one of the suckers, and I paid $360 so far. Recently, my wife and I decided to take a little vacation and visit our retirement lots out in Arizona.
And the clerk will read the last section.
They consider the opinions of concerned individuals and organizations. If and when a committee reports favorably on a bill, it is then read aloud 3 times, debated on the floor, and voted upon.
And gentlemen, this is a situation which preys upon the poor and upon the elderly of our state.
Mr. Speaker, I object to this bill. This would throw hundreds of people out of work. The advertising men that write the ads and perform the services. No, Mr. Speaker, I move this bill now.
A bill that passes in the Assembly goes to the Senate for approval, and vice versa. Usually the process of gaining approval in the Senate and the Assembly is speeded by simultaneous introduction of identical bills in both houses. Once a bill has received a majority vote in both houses, it is sent to the governor, who has a certain period of time to study it and to sign it into law, or to disapprove it, which is called a veto. The governor's veto may be overruled by a 2/3 vote in the Senate and the Assembly. The wheels of the legislature grind carefully, precisely, so that the emerging laws may further a good and orderly life in our state without unduly burdening the people with too much or too expensive government. Beside their special concern for the needs of their own districts, senators and assemblymen also tend to keep the interests of their own political party in mind as they vote. This coming state legislature, for the first time in 30 years, has more Democrats than Republicans. Of the 58 seats in our state Senate, Democrats will occupy 33 of them, Republicans 25. There are 150 seats here in the Assembly. Democrats now hold 88 of them, Republicans 62. Now, at first glance, this makes things look pretty bad for the Republicans, including a Republican governor. But by coincidence, 2 other problems are coming together at the same time that would make things very difficult politically for any incoming legislature. The 1965 legislature will have to face up to the need for increased taxes or new tax sources, simply to meet the increased costs of basic services that our state and local governments provide to the people. Secondly, this year, due to the Supreme Court order regarding reapportionment, every one of our state senators and assemblymen must run for office again this coming November. Normally, as you know, members of our legislature are elected for a 2-year term. Thus, they know that what they do this spring here might haunt them this fall. It is a political fact of life that taxes are unpopular, and no legislator wants to be unpopular in an election year. Because of this, I believe the only way to proceed now is simply for all of us here in Albany to rise above politics during this coming session. I'm convinced this can be done. In 1965, I will propose generally that the flags of partisanship be dipped and that the flag of statesmanship be flown high. Then specifically, I will propose actions to meet the growing needs of New York State. Here are some of those needs. Most parents can tell you how our schools today are struggling against the triple demand of soaring enrollment, advanced subjects, and special services.
We want our children to have as good an education as other children. We don't like to see them in the crowded conditions they're in now. In our school, we have 7 classrooms outside the building, and these classrooms have been outside of the building for 5 or 6 years. We see no remedy in sight. We have no facilities for vocational needs. Many of the children in this area should be trained vocationally.
In many areas, local property taxes in support of schools are becoming an increasingly heavy burden. Therefore, the state must again make a substantial increase in its aid to local schools districts. This is a vital proposal in my annual message.
On the first page of our worksheet, you'll notice that we have only balance sheet items. At the top of the page, we have our assets made up of cash, accounts receivable, and so forth. And we come on down so as to pick up our liabilities and our stockholders' equity.
There is expert opinion on hand that the people's need for education in years to come cannot possibly be met by more and bigger schools alone. Now, New York must put a foot in the future. I will propose that a statewide educational television network be developed over the next 10 years to a point where college credit courses, as well as grade and high school programs, can be seen on every television receiver in the state. My goal as governor has been that no young man or woman in our state with the desire and the ability for a college education should be denied it because their families don't have enough money. The legislature has strongly supported me in achieving that goal by approving greatly expanded financial aid for students. But because of rising costs, another increase is necessary in 1965 if we're not going to let our young people down.
I received the College Incentive Award of $50 per semester. I also work 17 hours a week at Strong Memorial Hospital. With the money I get from this job, I have to put towards necessities like clothes and car fare. I now find it necessary to take out a loan so I can go to school next semester. If it was possible to get some financial assistance, I would not have to take out this loan and possibly devote more time towards my studies.
There will be several proposals in the annual message concerning higher education. This year, a severe water shortage has given notice to every New Yorker that we must stop polluting our lakes, rivers, and beaches with human and industrial waste. Our factories must remove chemicals and fibers from the water they use. If they don't know how or can't afford it, the state should find ways to help them. Far more serious is the raw sewage or the poorly treated sewage being dumped into open waters by hundreds of our cities, towns, and villages. At one end of this inlet is the Hudson River. At the other end, the sewers of Hudson, New York.
Honestly, this is something we're not proud of, this pollution of the waters. We've got a big water problem here in the city of Hudson that we've been working on for years, and it seems a shame that all this pollution is going down into the Hudson River, and so that we won't ever be able to use the river. And unless something is done, and done fairly soon, I hate to think what will happen with the dearth of water in our community. The city's share of the total cost of cleaning up this pollution will be over $600,000, and that will mean a total tax increase to the taxpayers of the city of Hudson for the next 20 years of 15%, and we just can't afford it. We believe it should be done, but we can't do it. It's going to hurt the older people who have property, it's going to hurt business, and it's going to hurt industry. I realize that this is just part of the Hudson River, and I realize also that Albany and Rensselaer and Troy and some of the other communities pollute the river as we do. Perhaps they do it more than we are. And I think this is a project that everyone's got to dig in and do something about. You know, I'm not one of those that believes in running and crying to the state government for help.
at every turn. But communities like Hudson simply must have more money to help them.
The high cost of modern treatment plants and the high cost of connecting old sewers so that they can bring waste to a central point will go higher. The unfairness of one community fighting water pollution, if untreated sewage continues to come down from upstream, is evident. These factors make immediate action by the New York State government imperative. We may be in an age of miracles, but we dare not count on a miracle being devised to take the place of water. In the annual message, I will propose a state bond issue of $1 billion to help finance a 6-year program for pure waters in New York State. Every community in New York receives state aid for welfare, highways, education, and so on. Funds earmarked for a certain purpose, and for that purpose only. The one exception is called per capita aid. Per capita aid comes from the state with no strings attached. The amount is based on the number of people living in a city, town, or village. The money is used by the communities for their most pressing needs, whether or not those needs are covered by other state aid. The idea of per capita aid is a good one, to even out the differences in services provided by different communities and to strengthen local government. But with rising costs, the amount of per capita aid available is now too little for the idea to work well.
If increased state per capita aid were forthcoming to the city of Rochester, we could use it in a variety of ways. We could use it, for example, to step up and maybe double our code enforcement, that is, the inspection aspects of it especially. In our recreational programs and facilities, we would like to increase our attention in this field. Traffic signal controls and modern installations would be another area in which we would give attention. Our sewer system is one that needs attention very definitely, and it's probably completely outmoded. We've got to protect the health and welfare of our citizenry. The matter of streets and bridges, this is another problem that plagues most cities, and it's very, very costly. We would undoubtedly expand our police services as well. And the increased benefits that come to many city employees, for example, firemen and policemen as they work shorter work weeks. The municipal problems which I have just related are not unique only to the city of Rochester, for as a new member of the steering committee of the New York State Conference of Mayors, I can assure you that Rochester's problems are the same as the other problems of cities throughout the state of New York.
Certainly, local governments, being closest to the people, should be most sensitive and most responsive to local needs. In the annual message, I will propose that New York State double per capita aid from the present $100 million to $200 million a year. To hold down the growing accident and death rate on our highways, I will propose that new drivers be on probation for 6 months. During that period, for violations such as speeding and reckless driving, their licenses will be canceled. Such a law is needed to make new drivers, especially younger drivers, more careful behind the wheel.
Do you have that fine? Yes, sir. Step over to the clerk and pay the fine. As city court judge, I handle approximately 250 cases, traffic cases a year, of which about 65 to 70% represent teenage violations. Now, I do not know if it's because of arrogance or fearlessness or lack of maturity, but the teenage driver himself does not seem to know or does not seem to be aware of the danger to himself and to others of these present-day high-speed, high-powered automobiles when they're not properly or safely handled. For some reason or other, teenage drivers always have sufficient monies to pay the fines, no matter how large the fine may be. The only time in my experience that I have found a teenager to become upset or concerned is when his license itself is placed in jeopardy, when he may in effect lose it or have it revoked or suspended for any length of time. He won't be taking the chance of jumping that light the next time, or giving that extra burst of speed, or sneaking past a stop sign. I certainly would be in accord with a law that would set up a probation type of license for new teenage drivers.
Accidents are also caused by faulty cars. Recent checks by the state police and the Motor Vehicles Department found that many new cars, lacking an official inspection, often had more things wrong with them than older cars, which are inspected. Based on this evidence, I will propose that for the first time, new motor vehicles undergo a safety inspection before they're licensed in New York State. Legislation for increased aid to education, for a doubling of per capita aid, for putting new drivers on probation, may not be popular with everyone, but the need is nonetheless. A concern for popularity might indicate that I should not propose repeal of the full crew law again, but I do intend to propose repeal again in the 1965 annual message. New York's railroads are cutting back their service. Some are teetering on the edge of collapse. To survive, I believe that they must be relieved of carrying on their payrolls certain workers whose jobs were necessary in the days of the steam engine, but not today. The railroad unions disagree with this point of view. They call the existing statute a safe crew law, not a full crew law. They argue with great conviction that firemen on freight trains and on switch engines are necessary for the safety and well-being of railroad crews and cargoes. They argue with great sincerity for the third brakeman on the freight trains and various other crew members. The railroad companies disagree with the unions, pointing up extreme situations caused by the excess crew law, as they call it. For example, they cite the freight train that originates in New York State and about 16 miles later runs into Pennsylvania, which has no full crew law. There, one New York brakeman gets off, having earned a full day's pay for a 30-minute ride, during which, according to the railroads, he performed no useful function. Somewhere between these arguments lies the truth and the solution. I am very aware that people's jobs are involved in the repeal of the old full crew laws. It is my intention, however, that repeal be carried out without hardship to those presently employed on the trains. 4 other states have repealed such laws in 1964. It is now time for New York to do so. The interest of the people as a whole must prevail. Whether or not repeal of the full crew law is popular, it is necessary. A governor of New York must not only propose new laws, but also just how they're to be paid for. Differing from the federal government, our state budget must be balanced when it is submitted at the end of January. As you know, the state basically receives its money from taxes and fees. Last year, these amounts were realized from these sources. It will take political courage for the legislators to vote the needed increases or new taxes this year. Now, borrowing money for the state is something I've tried to avoid in the past 6 years. As a result, you can see, New York State has to pay only $35 million a year for debt, as compared to New York City, for example, whose annual debt service is $467 million. But in the case of water pollution, borrowing seems to be justified because at the same time our children are repaying that debt, they will be enjoying the blessings of pure water. These are some of my thoughts as governor on the eve of the annual message. At noon, Ansley B. Borkowski, clerk of the last assembly, will take up the gavel.
The members will please take their seats, and the House will come to order.
The gavel will rap 3 more times for the opening prayer.
Almighty God, we beseech thee to look with favor upon these servants to whom authority has been given by the people of this state. Imbue them with the spirit of wisdom, goodness, and truth, and so rule their hearts and bless their endeavors, that law and order, justice and peace may prevail. Amen.
In the next hour, a Speaker of the Assembly will be elected. The Senate will choose their President pro tem and Majority Leader. These events will be reported by the Capitol Press Corps from their chairs beneath the rostrum, including Ed Bates of the Troy Record, who will be 82 this month, Emmett O'Brien of the Gannett News, and Kurt King of the United Press International. Art Brooks of the Associated Press will be roaming the aisles with his Rolleiflex camera. The new Speaker will inform the Assembly, and the Lieutenant Governor will inform the Senate that they have received letters from the Governor requesting a joint session for delivery of the annual message. Each House will send a delegation of 2 to escort the Governor to the Assembly chamber. At about 1 o'clock, 58 senators will appear to sit in 58 extra chairs. Then Lieutenant Governor Malcolm Wilson, now on the rostrum with the Speaker of the Assembly and the chaplain, will sound the gavel again.
Pursuant to resolutions duly adopted in both houses, the Senate and Assembly are met in joint session for the purpose of receiving the annual message of the Governor. Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Nelson A. Rockefeller.
At that moment, I begin to speak in the name of the people of New York State.